This call is now
This
being
is
recorded.
Global Tel-Link. You have a prepaid call from
Ricky Black.
an inmate at the Centinela State Prison, Centinela, California. This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded. You have a prepaid call. You will not be charged for this call. To accept this call, say or dial 5 now. Thank you for using Global Tel-Link.
On our last conversation, you just picked up some new charges and you ended up being sentenced to state prison. What year was this?
Yeah.
And for how long was your sentence for?
1989, I got sentenced to state prison for 4 years for burglarizing an apartment. And I wound up taking the charges off my co-defendants at a young age. I really didn't understand what was going on. And I was just really full of myself. I had a lot of ego going on. And I wound up taking the charges off my co-defendants and accepted 4 years and went to prison and wound up going to the reception center in Tehachapi State Prison at the time.
So I want to go ahead and take you back to when you were going to court or the court proceedings. Did you understand any of what was going on in court, any of the verbiage that they were using in the courtroom? And what kind of offers were they making you?
Well, at that time, I had 4 co-defendants. And when I initially got arrested, I had told the detectives that I was the one that did the burglary. And my other co-defendants had nothing to do with it. And I wanted to take the charges off of them so they could be released. But the detectives at the time didn't want that to happen. And what I wanted to do was tell them about other burglaries that I had committed and kind of make a deal so they could be released too. And at some point they threw the towel in and said, "Nah, that's not a deal we want to take." And they wound up arresting all 4 of me and my co-defendants and took us to the county jail. And at that time, I don't know the process. I didn't know the process of the courts or the district attorneys. I was first time in the county jail. And I wound up getting a lot of bad advice from older inmates that were in custody. And I looked up to a lot of the older guys. A lot of the older guys knew my mom. They knew my dad. They would come to my house a lot and buy drugs from my mother. So I knew a lot of the older guys in there. And they really gave me a lot of bad advice, saying that I shouldn't accept any deal, that my co-defendants, all they wanted to do was get out and they were using me and things like that. So I had a bunch of bad advice from them. And my attorneys at the time really wasn't helping. I did admit to my crime. I did do it. I was just wanting to accept the punishment that I had coming because I'm the one that committed the crime and cut my co-defendants loose. But for somehow the judicial system wasn't working in our favor or in my favor at that time to allow that to happen. And what wound up happening is they wound up convicting me and all 3 of my co-defendants. And I got to say, they really didn't have nothing to do with it. It was me that was doing it at the time. And I had them waiting in the car. They really didn't come in the apartment and burglarize it like I did. So I thought it was unfair, but a lot of bad advice was happening with me at that time from older guys.
And during this time, when you were sentenced to 4 years, was it half-time, or what was the percentage of time that you had to serve before you were able to parole?
At that time, it was 50%. You had to do 50% of your time as long as you had good credit, good time, I guess. You went to work or school, you could do 50% of your time, which would be 2 years, and be released.
And do you recall how many points you were given once you were assessed?
I did. I received 36 points because I had been incarcerated in youth authorities prior to that, which was a felony conviction. I didn't graduate high school, so more points were added on to my points, and I was put in on a level 3 prison at the time in Jamestown, which is Tuolumne County.
And can you play back or help us visualize what your first day in Jamestown was like?
It was like a field trip for me. It was fun. Oddly, looking back on it now, I was excited. It wasn't scary for me. At that time, everyone that I knew had been to prison. My mom and my dad, all their friends had been to prison. My dad had been to prison. My uncle had been to prison. My brother was in prison. So going through that process, I knew a lot of guys in prison. And because I'm from Bakersfield, California, one of the things that I was told when I go to a prison is tell other guys where I was from. And then my homeboys from my hometown would come and introduce themselves and look out for me. So when I went to Jamestown, that's exactly what happened. I showed up and said I was from Bakersfield, and some guys went.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
They told the other guys, hey, you guys got a homeboy from Bakersfield here, and they all came over and introduced themselves and embraced me. And in fact, they knew who my parents were. So for me at such a young age, it was exciting. All of it was new and exciting for me.
Understandable. And so you're in prison. Can you think of a time that you didn't feel like you were in prison, like you had a normal interaction with somebody and they treated you like a human, not like an inmate?
Wow, that's a great question. It's a great question. At that time, at that particular time when I was serving time, I didn't have any real interactions on a personal level with anybody. Everything was criminally oriented for me. But I remember a time I wound up going to the hole and catching a shoe term and going to Pelican Bay in 1991. And I remember when I was there, this officer was opening and shutting my door, and I was asleep. And when I came out later that day, I was going to classification. He stopped me and talked to me, and he told me, he said, hey, I know you're young and this is your first time in prison. He goes, but it's very dangerous. He goes, when I open your door, you need to be paying attention to what's happening and who's outside of your door. Otherwise, you can be hurt. And that was like really the one real moment that prison really hit me, was when he told me that, coming from an officer. And I'm assuming he told me that because he had seen a lot of stuff in his time, and I was so young that he took it on himself to tell me something, because nobody else was telling me anything at that time, and nor was I listening to anybody. And I believe I was 20 in 1991. So that was like the first real experience I had on a human level, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's something like that. And you know, I know in prison, everybody or a lot of inmates don't have that normal interaction that we would have, you know, with either your family and friends. It's more of what's in it for me, or what am I going to get out of this relationship type of deal, right? In prison.
Absolutely. So, what can you do for me today, right?
Yeah. So I just wanted to shed some light on a different level, on a human
This
level.
call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
It's a great question, and because I'm in recovery today and I've changed my life, it's something that I talk about in groups in prison. And I'm not trying to get ahead of the conversation. I just want to point out how important that is. There's no sense of kindness or sense of real community in prison. Everybody's out for themselves to get you for what you want or to manipulate you, especially young guys like I was at that time, being a young kid. My older homeboys thought it was okay to sick me on somebody and attack them because they weren't liked on the yard. And I wound up going to Pelican Bay SHU in 1991. And so, there was a lot of manipulation, a lot of using youngsters coming in, a lot of that criminal element that as a young kid you don't even realize is happening to you. So that human connection and that human kindness that people in the real world experience, when you experience that in prison for the first time, you get emotional because you're not used to that kind of kindness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because prison is it's a very vicious place, and if you show any weakness, they will eat you up and spit you out alive or even dead.
It does, and I've seen it throughout my career. Prison has changed a lot today than it was, but there's still the human connection and human interactions on a real level. Everybody in here is reserved for a good reason, and there's not a lot of that kindness and compassion and empathy for one another because everybody's so worried about their own safety and their own self that everything becomes selfish and self-centered in everything they do because prison is like that. Everyone's out for themselves.
It seems like it becomes like a transaction. Everything's a transaction in prison. Yeah.
It is. Absolutely. Everything has a monetary value on it.
Let me take you back for a moment back to YA. When you were in YA, did you dream of going to prison? Did you ever dream about being in Pelican Bay? Was that something that you were aiming for?
It wasn't something that I ever considered of going to prison. Like my thought process at the time was here and now, today. What am I doing today? I never even thought about getting out of YA or what might that look like. It's kind of strange when I look back on it at my younger self and how I viewed the world. And I remember the night before I got out of prison, out of YA, one of the guards that I had a scuffle with called me to the front of the unit, and he told me, he said, I know you're getting out tomorrow, Mr. Black. He goes, but I just want to tell you, if you don't change your life, you're going to spend the rest of your time in prison, the rest of your life in prison. And that was the first time that I ever even considered prison at the time, was when he told me that. And me and him never got along, so when he told me that, I was like, oh yeah, that guy, he's just telling me some dumb stuff. But the truth was, he was being honest with me.
Yeah, it tends to happen like that. We tend to ignore what others see in our future.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
All right, so
You have 60 seconds remaining.